Hello, everyone. Thank you for your interest in my research lab. My name is Dr. Sakara Fisher, and I thought I would create a video to answer some of the most commonly asked questions that I get in my email box from prospective students. Um, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I want to do is just tell you a little bit about myself. So I am a trained school psychologist. I graduated with my PhD from Michigan State University. I did my internship in New Orleans public schools, and then I worked as a school psychologist for about 3 years before transitioning to academia. My first academic position was actually at Howard University. There, I was the program director. I engaged in a lot of mentoring and teaching. And then I transferred to the University of Kentucky, where I really got to dig in deep with some of my research to really focus on increasing productivity, seeking out grant funds. And now I am here at the University of Georgia, where I'm really getting to engage in and with the community around the areas of research that I'm interested in. So that sort of segues me into my next topic, research. So my research mainly focuses on populations of color. And I've sort of narrowed that down, specifically thinking about mental health and substance use prevention and interventions for populations of color within low-income school settings. I'm particularly really interested in thinking about ways schools can better serve minority students in schools. As a previous practitioner, I really saw a lot of places where schools could do a better job at addressing the mental health needs of kids in schools. I really find the school to prison pipeline that you guys may have heard of, or the discipline gap that you may have heard of, to really be partly a result of people not identifying the unmet mental health needs of kids that are in their schools. And so what typically happens, or what we find in the research, is that, you know, if you have a white kid that engages in a behavior, it's more thought of as a mental health concern. There's counseling, there's remediation, there's support. But if you have an African American or Latinx kid that's engaging in that same type of behavior, all of a sudden it's sort of deviance, it's punishment, it's expulsion. And so what I really want to try to do is disrupt that current way of thinking when we think about kids in low-income minority serving schools, thinking about ways that we can identify their mental health needs, that we can provide services and supports for those kids and for those families. The biggest thing, I think, is this topic of implementation science. So for me, I know that there are a ton of programs that have been developed that people have found to be really effective for reducing substance use, for reducing mental health concerns, for decreasing depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, all of those things. But what I find is that no one does them, right? So we're in schools and we see kids and we've got all these wonderful resources out there, but why aren't people implementing them? And that's my question. That's sort of part of the question that I want my lab to be able to answer, as to how do you help schools, school districts, one, identify practices that are evidence-based? Because from my experience and from my experience working with schools and school districts, a lot of times the thing that is selected is the shiniest thing that's presented from whatever company is coming to present. So if the person from this company does a really great presentation, it gets everyone on board, the school is likely to sign up for it for a number of different reasons, but one of those reasons might not be the strength of its evidence base. So of course they want things that work, right? But they also want things that are feasible, things that are easy for their teachers to implement, for affordable. And so the thing is, how do you get people to implement things that have the greatest amount of research, particularly in schools that have low resources, right? So you have to think about, what do these interventions have? What components of these interventions are most effective? And then how do you work these interventions into school systems and school settings in a way that allows them to engage in the work? And it might be that you have this full-blown evidence-based intervention, but through research, you've identified that, you know, even though it has 6 components, that maybe the 2 components that create the biggest amount of difference are X and Y. And so you work with that district to really, really work on implementing X and Y, even if they can't do the other 4 components of that intervention. We know that the biggest bang for your buck in terms of intervention components are X and Y. So my goal is to really help to be a support and help schools identify mental health interventions that are effective, that they can do, and also substance use interventions, and reducing stigma around mental health and substance use in schools, for schools to become places where behavioral concerns and mental health concerns aren't stigmatized, but a place where the school psychologists, the school counselors, the school social workers know what to do if a kid comes to them and discloses having significant mental health concerns, whether it be providing services themselves or connecting with services in the community. And right now, I think that a lot of these approaches and interventions are disjointed. And so I really want to try to create this comprehensive approach to providing services, mental health services for minoritized kids in schools. So the other sort of related question that I often get is, where do I see my research going within the next 5 years? So right now I'm really focused on substance use prevention. I think the biggest reason why I'm focused on this is because as a practitioner, one, I saw that it was an issue, but two, we're seeing an increase in substance use among minority populations. Even though those rates are still lower than white populations, what happens is because we criminalize Black and brown students anyway, even though Black and brown kids use substances at rates lower than their white peers, they have more problems. They're more likely to be suspended. They're more likely to be expelled. They're more likely to end up with a substance use disorder later on. And so trying to figure out ways that we can provide these types of services. So right now, the current projects that I'm working on are training school-based mental health professionals in how do you respond if a kid discloses that they're using substances to you, training them in brief motivational enhancement therapy, helping them connect and communicate with community partners around substance use and make referrals. So within the next 5 years, I see myself really digging into school-based substance use intervention specifically, but also trying to connect that with some sort of integrated approach with mental health, because as we know, substance use and mental health issues like anxiety, depression, conduct disorder, antisocial personality disorder are comorbid, right? And so oftentimes substance use disorder or the substance use behavior is actually a manifestation of something else that's going on. So it's important for us to think about how do you address all of them, but in a way that is feasible for schools to actually do, right? We're not asking schools to engage in treatment. That's not necessarily the school's place, but we are asking schools to have a plan. When a student discloses to them about when do you contact parents, how do you contact parents, when do you contact someone outside of the school to address the issue, how do you make sure and provide incentives or support for students who need to see outside support? Because what we know is that students are disclosing to teachers, to peers, to school counselors. At the same time, they're not really aware of what to do with that information ethically and professionally. And so my goal is to try to help fill that gap. And also to make sure that school psychologists as a profession are aware that this is also part of the mental health services that schools provide. Substance use is a part of mental health, but yet within our field, it's been neglected quite a bit in terms of, whether or not school psychologists should be engaging in this kind of work. So I think it's really important. And so that's sort of where I see my line of research going. I currently have a grant that I'm trying to finish up this year, but it's been difficult with COVID. So I have, it's sort of been on pause, but I'll pick that back up. And I have another grant that I'll be submitting in February that will be related to sort of more implementation science around substance use. I will say that another line of my research on top of like school-based mental health interventions, but then there's also the training of school psychology students and school psychologists around social justice and cultural competence. So my lab really does think about ways in these culturally relevant and appropriate ways, and how do you provide services, how do we train students in our programs to be able to provide adequate services. All of these things to me are a social justice issue. Providing adequate mental health services to prevent and slow down the school to prison pipeline, social justice issue. Making sure that teachers, administrators, school psychologists are trained in a way that helps them identify and provide appropriate culturally responsive interventions, social justice issues. So all of those things are things that can come out of my lab. So I've got a number of papers, I guess I can sort of tell you, that students have worked on as far as dissertations from my lab. One paper was looking at teacher white identity development and whether or not that had any sort of impact on student experiences of microaggressions in their classrooms. That was one dissertation. Another dissertation focused on discrit, so that's disability and critical race theory, and thinking about how do school psychologists interpret different vignettes based on the intersection of a child's disability and their race, and does that make a difference for what sorts of evaluations they suggest or what sort of interventions and treatments that a kid gets in schools. So all of these things are things that are part of my lab, but as you work on things that are in my lab, apart from your dissertation, the majority of things that you'll be doing is minority, mental health, and substance use. Let's see, my mentoring style. I would say that my mentoring style is pretty flexible. As someone who is not necessarily a first generation college student, but maybe my dad went to college, he didn't finish, my mother went to community college, but as the first person to sort of go through and get my PhD, I find it really important to provide direct instruction and didactics around the soft skills that, or the skills that aren't in classes that we ask students to do. So if you're working with me and I say, okay, I need you to do some research on this area, I'll sort of get a sense of how comfortable you feel with conducting research, to searching the literature. If you're not aware of how to do those things, and we'll sit down, we'll do some readings, we'll go through together, I'll show you how to search, how to save, and then I'll send you on your way. Because what I think happens is that oftentimes kids or students come to academia and there's a certain assumption around what skills students have already. And then for particularly minoritized populations or first generation college students, the skills that we have coming into graduate school might not be the same skills as they're expecting from us. And then oftentimes we go off, we fail, we feel upset about it. We might be the only one person of color in our cohort, and that sort of feeds into this imposter syndrome around, should I even be here? Do I deserve? We're just gonna knock all that out, okay? We're gonna provide you with the explicit instruction that you need to get the task done. So that way you don't have to worry about it. So I provide explicit instruction in different statistical methods, approaches, literature reviews, how to write a paper, how to write an introduction, literature review, discussion, methods, results, all of that. How do you actually submit a paper for publication? I go through all of it to make sure that students feel comfortable and everyone has a level playing field when they're asked to go off and complete a task. I also believe in making sure that students are prepared for any type of career when they come out, including an academic one. So I ask that my students publish either at least a co-authored paper or a first authored paper every year. Anything that students work on with me as a co-author, any writing that they do on a paper, they will get authorship credit for. So right now I have an undergraduate student who has done a lot of really great work on a couple of papers actually that we're sending out, and now she's going into medical school with 2 papers under review. I mean, that's sort of unheard of, right? So I believe in providing the level of support and acknowledgement of the work that students do in their lab by giving them the credit that's due to them on the actual publication of the paper. As far as checking in and that sort of thing, I sort of follow what the students want. If you feel like you're a pretty independent worker, I can let you go off on your own. You can check in when you want. We typically start off with more check-ins, and as I kind of see that you are a more independent worker, I'll say, all right, well, you let me know the next time that you'd like to meet, and we'll meet when you need to meet. I'm also more than happy to meet with students who need more of a frequent check-in. If you need to meet with me every week, we'll have a day and time. We will meet every week. We'll go over what your goals are, what you were supposed to get done. I'll provide you feedback. So it's really just a give and take, and trying to provide what you need, but also allowing you to develop as a professional within the lab and develop the skills that you need and to develop some autonomy. And sometimes that starts off, like I said, with lots of meetings in the beginning, and then they sort of spread out as you get more comfortable in what you're able to do. Um, let's see. The last thing, which is a major question that I think that students often ask me, is what am I looking for in a student? And I will say that if I could sort of like pick some of the best qualities that I would like in a student, the first one would be a student that is able to take feedback, and doesn't take it as an indication of their lack of ability, but rather a indication of just ways that they can get better, that that we're trying to become the best um, student, researcher, writer that you can be. And I haven't really had any issues with students having difficulty accepting feedback, but that's definitely something that I really appreciate in the students that I have worked with, is that I'm able to provide feedback in a warm way, right? And they're able to take that and to make the changes that they need. I would probably call myself like a warm demander in terms of how I like to work with students. So I'm pretty firm in terms of like, these are the deadlines, this is what you said, this is what you're going to send in to me, because I feel like that's important in developing professionals. But I'm also warm in the fact that I make sure that you understand that this is for your own growth and development, that I'm here, I'm supportive, I'm helping you meet those deadlines and those goals. But on the other hand, I need students to be accepting of that feedback. I need students to take initiative. I really like students, if they've been given an assignment, and let's say the assignment's due in a week, and we meet in a week and they don't have it done, and I ask, well, why don't you have this done? And they say, oh, well, I don't understand. Those types of students aren't the types of students that I like to work with. I like to work with the students who say, she gave me an assignment on Friday, it's Monday, I know it's due on Friday, let me email her with the questions that I have so that I can get the assignment done in the time that I said I was going to have it done. So making sure that you're taking initiative, you're asking the questions that you need to ask in order to get what you need to get done is really important. I would also say a student who is a hard worker, and we have a lab here. So I have a lab, the Prisms lab, here on my website if you're looking at this video for the most part. And we all need to bring something to the table. So it's not like Dr. Fisher's lab. I mean, I am leading it, but everyone on the lab should have something to bring to the table. Are you a great writer? Are you a great researcher? Are you a really great thinker? Can you come up with really interesting questions? Are you a prolific reader? And so you are really familiar with a literature in an area. Are you good at website design? Are you good at creating flyers? Are you great at working with communities and connecting with communities? So your participation in my lab should not be passive. In order for the lab to be successful, we need active participants in the lab. That means you should understand what you bring to the table and you should offer that up to the lab as a part of your contribution. So I don't like my lab meetings to be just sort of me talking unidirectionally to someone else, but I like it for it to be where students are like, I have this really great idea, or I think I know a really great way to present these results, or here's a conference that I think that will be really great for us. All that does is really boost the work of the entire lab, and it makes the lab a lot more successful, which means more funding that will be available for students. That means more publications. That means more fellowship opportunities. So all of us working together in collaboration really helps to boost the resources that will be at the disposal of the members in the lab. And I think that's really important. And I also think I am looking for, as a Research One institution and as a research-focused doctoral program, and also as someone who is really focused on sort of my next stage of my career, which is really not just publications, but having continuous grants. I'm really looking for students who are actually interested in academic careers. I know when I went to graduate school, I was not interested in academic career. And even if you aren't necessarily 100% sold on the academic career, you are engaging in the research and the writing and the work with enough fervor to sort of show that this is something that you're interested in learning. I have a lot of knowledge to share about grant writing about academia, and I think that a lot of that information would be shared well with someone who actually wants to have this sort of role, and to be able to mentor someone and what it means to um, research and write grants, I think is really important. I know school psychology is sort of an applied field, so many times there aren't a lot of students who come in wanting to be an academic. Like I said, I didn't want to. It was the last thing that I wanted to do, even though I came in under a grant that was meant to create professors. And now look, here I am, a professor, which I never thought I would be. So I urge you to, if you're not necessarily interested in academia, to being open to that and approaching the research and the writing and the grant writing of the lab with the fervor of a student who actually would be interested in an academic career afterwards would be really helpful, because it would really help to boost the productivity that's coming out of the lab. So someone that's interested in research, I think, is really important for me at this stage of my career. And so if you are able to demonstrate that in either your personal statement or in your that's something that I think would be a good fit. So I hope that answers any of the questions that you all have. I really put this out as a primer. I'm still more than happy to field emails that you all may have, additional questions that I didn't answer. And let's see. I think that's it. So still feel free, even after watching this video, to reach out if you have questions that were not answered on this video or the questions that were not answered on the website. I'm more than happy, and I look forward to receiving and reviewing your applications. And yeah, thank you for your interest in the PRISMS Lab. Thanks.